The explosion came first, a sound that tore through the Texas afternoon like the sky itself was ripping apart.
This is a
Fire
critical moment
bloomed
for the
across
project. We need to
testing
ensure
pad in
everything is on
Fort
track.
Worth,
Understood. We'll
orange
handle
and
our part. What
hungry,
about the schedule?
consuming everything the demonstration had promised. People screamed. Camera crews stumbled backward, still filming, even as terror drove them away from the heat that warped the air into visible waves. Through the smoke, a figure moved against the tide. Gray janitor's uniform. No protective gear. Running straight toward the inferno while 200 others ran the opposite direction. The child's voice cut through the chaos, high and desperate. "Daddy!" The man didn't slow. He vaulted the safety barrier like muscle memory lived in his bones, grabbed a fire extinguisher from a wall mount without breaking stride, and sprinted directly into flames that shouldn't have let anyone survive. A woman's voice, refined, East Coast educated, cracking with something that might have been command or might have been fear, might have been, "Someone stop him." No one moved. The crowd had become a living thing, driven by instinct, and instinct said, "Run." Only this man moved forward, reaching the child frozen at the edge of the fire zone, just as a secondary explosion sent debris spinning through the air like shrapnel. Metal fragments impacted the concrete around them. One piece caught his arm, tearing fabric and skin. He threw himself over the girl, covering her completely. His body became her shield. The fire extinguisher created a temporary barrier of foam and chemical white, just enough space to breathe, just enough time to move. He scooped her into his arms. She was limp with terror, barely conscious, and ran. 40 yards to the exit. His back screamed with every step, some old injury awakened by new trauma. Vision tunneled. The world reduced to the door ahead, and the weight in his arms and the simple mathematics of survival: keep moving or die. The fire suppression system activated. Water and foam rained down, turning smoke to steam. He burst through the emergency exit and collapsed onto concrete, still hot from the Texas sun. The girl in his arms was crying now, which meant breathing, which meant alive. His own breath wouldn't come. The pain in his back had become something catastrophic, radiating through his spine like electricity, finding every nerve. "Daddy?" The girl's voice small and broken. "Daddy, are you okay?" He couldn't answer. The world was going gray at the edges, sound muffling like he'd dropped underwater. But she was safe. That singular fact remained even as everything else began to slip away. Footsteps running toward them. Multiple voices shouting for medics, for help, for someone to do something. Hands on his shoulders, rolling him carefully onto his back. He looked up and saw a woman's face above him, makeup smudged with soot mascara, running steel gray eyes wide with something that looked almost like recognition. "Brooks, can you hear me? Stay with me." He tried to speak. Only one word came out, barely a whisper. "Lauren?" The girl's voice stronger now. "He means my mom. Her name was Lauren." The woman's expression shifted confusion to understanding, to something softer. She looked at the girl with genuine concern, the corporate mask completely gone. "Emma, he's going to be okay. I promise." The girl was crying again, her hand touching his arm where the metal had torn through fabric. "Daddy, your arm." The woman looked. Her breath caught audibly. The sleeve was ripped from shoulder to elbow, exposing skin and something else. Ink, dark against his forearm, detailed and unmistakable even through blood and soot. Eagle wings, intricate, military precision in every line. Below the wings text, Raptor Squadron. Below that, a single word, Reaper. The woman stared at the tattoo. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. More people gathering now. Pentagon officials in suits, board members with Texas oil money in their DNA, press with cameras still recording. All of them forming a circle around the fallen janitor and the child and the CEO who'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. The medics arrived with a stretcher and urgent professional voices. The man's eyes closed. The world went dark, and somewhere in that darkness, a title card appeared in the space where stories fold back on themselves. 6 hours earlier, the mop hit the concrete floor with a sound that shouldn't have carried, but in the massive hangar it echoed like a gunshot. The metal handle clattered once, twice, then settled into silence that felt deliberate, calculated. Victoria Crane stood on the steel catwalk 20 feet above the hangar floor, her heels clicking against the metal grating with each step. The sound was precise, measured the auditory signature of a woman who knew exactly how much space she occupied and refused to apologize for it. Her suit was Armani charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that cost more than most people in this facility made in a month. Harvard MBA confidence in every line of her posture. Below her, a man in a gray janitor's uniform stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the mop on the floor, but not moving to pick it up. Not yet. Pick it up. Victoria's voice carried the sharp edges of Boston's North Shore old money diction that had been softened at MIT but never fully lost its aristocratic bite. And stay away from my jets. Men who mop floors don't deserve to touch machines that cost more than their lives. The hangar held its breath. 15 engineers frozen at their workstations. 3 security guards near the entrance suddenly very interested in this interaction. And in the corner, barely visible behind a stack of equipment crates, an 8-year-old girl with dark hair and a sketchbook clutched to her chest, her eyes already filling with tears. The man Carter Brooks, according to the name stitched above his shirt pocket, bent down slowly and retrieved the mop. His movements were careful, controlled like someone who'd learned to manage pain through sheer force of will. When he straightened, his face remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was calculating angles, measuring distances, reading the room with an awareness that didn't quite fit the uniform. Victoria descended the staircase, each step deliberate. She moved like a woman who'd spent 6 months proving herself in a boardroom full of men who'd expected her to fail. Like someone who'd weaponized her father's legacy into armor, she wore every waking moment. She stopped 3 feet from Carter, close enough to make her point, close enough for him to smell her perfume, something expensive and sterile that came in bottles shaped like weapons. "Do you have any idea what that jet is worth?" Her gesture indicated the X-9 Raptor prototype behind him, all sleek lines and classified technology gleaming under industrial lights. Carter's voice came out with a Texas drawl that was calm, almost conversational. The kind of voice that had talked people through worse situations than this. 400 million, but the technology patents are worth more. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the first stirrings of suspicion. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the ice-cold certainty of someone who couldn't afford to show weakness. "So you can read a brochure. Congratulations." She turned to the security guards who'd moved closer to watch. "Escort Mr." She glanced at his name tag. "Brooks out of this section. And make sure he understands that janitors clean hallways, not history." The guard stepped forward. Carter raised one hand just slightly. "I'll go. No escort needed." He picked up his bucket and mop, movements still careful, still controlled. As he walked toward the exit, he passed the corner where the girl sat with her notebook. His daughter, anyone watching could see it in the shape of her face, the way she held herself with the same quiet dignity he carried like invisible armor. Carter paused just long enough to kneel beside her, his body blocking her from Victoria's line of sight. "Listen to me, sweetheart." Emma's face was red, tears streaming, but she was fighting hard not to make a sound. 8 years old, and already she'd learned that crying quietly was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. "What she said doesn't define me. What I do when no one's watching that defines me. You understand?" The girl nodded, but her lip trembled. She understood the words, even if the feelings were bigger than both of them. "Can we go home?" "Not yet, darlin'. I still have 3 hours on my shift, but you can sit in the break room. There's a vending machine with those crackers you like, the ones with peanut butter." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it seemed to exist in a different universe than the humiliation that had just occurred. Then he stood his back protesting with every movement and walked toward the door. He could feel Victoria's eyes on him. Feel them like he used to feel radar locks during missions he wasn't supposed to talk about. But he didn't look back. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Not in public. Not in front of his daughter. Not when the only victory available came with costs he couldn't afford. The break room was empty when Carter settled Emma at a table with her crackers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency that lived somewhere between annoying and hypnotic. A Dr. Pepper vending machine in the corner, a Lone Star machine beside it. Texas in every detail. "Draw me something beautiful, kiddo. Something that flies." Emma opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. Her hands moved with confidence that surprised people who didn't know her, didn't know where the talent came from. She began sketching immediately, a jet rendered with engineering precision that shouldn't have been possible for an 8-year-old. The proportions were accurate, the engine placement correct. The wing structure showed understanding of aerodynamics that most adults never acquired. Carter stepped away, pulling his phone from his pocket. 3 missed calls, all of them numbers he recognized and none of them bringing good news. Parkland Hospital Billing Department. Twice. Arlington Gardens apartment complex. Emma's school in Grand Prairie. He deleted the voicemails without listening. What was the point? The answers were always the same. He didn't have the money. He couldn't get more hours. The VA benefits covered some of his medical bills, but not all. And definitely not Emma's therapy sessions for the anxiety she'd developed after watching her mother waste away in a hospital bed that smelled like antiseptic and false hope. He was drowning. Had been drowning for 3 years. Nobody could see it because he'd gotten too good at holding his breath. His phone buzzed. A text from Walter Jenkins, one of the senior engineers who'd been kind to him since he started working here 6 months ago. Heard what happened. "You okay, son?" Carter typed back with thumbs that had gripped flight controls in situations where a quarter-second delay meant death. "Just another day." The response came immediately. "That woman has no idea who she's dealing with." Carter stared at the message for a long moment. His reflection looked back from the phone's black screen, a man in his late 30s who looked older, carrying weight that had nothing to do with pounds and everything to do with the space between who he used to be and who he'd been forced to become. He typed, "Neither does anyone else. Walter." That's the point. He put his phone away and went back to work. "Because that's what you did. You kept moving. You showed up. You did the job nobody else wanted to do, and you did it well enough that maybe your daughter would learn that dignity wasn't something other people could take from you. It was something you carried inside in places they couldn't reach." Victoria Crane stood alone in her father's office. Her office now, though, after 6 months, it still didn't feel like it belonged to her. The corner space had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Fort Worth, the Trinity River, cutting through the city like a promise that water could carve paths through stone if it had enough time and enough patience. She wasn't looking at the view. Her eyes were fixed on the photograph on the wall, the one her father had refused to take down even when she'd suggested the office needed updating. General Robert Crane, 20 years younger, shaking hands with a pilot in a flight suit. The pilot's face was motion-blurred, caught mid-turn, but the insignia on his chest was perfectly clear. Iron eagle wings, sharp, detailed, unmistakable. Below the wings, text that had been classified until 2018. Raptor Squadron. Victoria had grown up with whispers about the Raptor Squadron, an elite unit of fighter pilots who flew missions so dangerous they were still redacted in official documents. Her father had served with them briefly in the early 2000s before transitioning, from military contractor to aerospace CEO. He'd never talked about that time in detail, except for one story. Late at night after too much Kentucky bourbon when the walls between General Robert Crane and Dad got thin enough to see through. The memory came back in her father's voice, roughened by whiskey and something that might have been regret. He refused the medal, Victoria. I offered him money, a job, anything he wanted. He just shook his head and walked away. Said he didn't deserve recognition for doing what anyone would have done. Young Victoria, 16, and already accepted to MIT, though she wouldn't start for another year. Did you ever see him again? No. He disappeared. Some said he died in training. Some said he just stopped existing, like he'd used up all his courage in one moment and had nothing left for the ordinary parts of life. Present-day Victoria pulled herself back from the memory. Her phone was buzzing. Email notification from Richard Hamilton, board chair, old Dallas oil money. The kind of man who wore his wealth like other people wore cologne. Subject, emergency board meeting. She opened it. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Concerns about leadership direction. Translation. They were circling, waiting for her to fail, waiting to prove that Sterling Crane's daughter couldn't fill Sterling Crane's shoes. Victoria picked up her phone, looked at it, then threw it across the room with enough force that the screen cracked against the wall and fell to the carpet. "I'm not you." Her voice came out rough, the Boston accent thickening the way it always did when she was alone and tired and fighting battles on too many fronts. "I'll never be you. And they all know it." The photograph didn't answer. The pilot's blurred face kept its secrets. The Iron Eagle wings remained sharp and clear and completely unaware that somewhere in Fort Worth, a janitor wore the same insignia under a sleeve that had just been soaked with cleaning solution. Victoria pulled up her laptop. Personnel files. She'd been thinking about the janitor since the moment he'd answered her question about the jet's value. Since she'd seen the way he moved, not like someone who cleaned floors, but like someone who'd been trained to calculate angles and assess threats and maintain perfect situational awareness in environments where a single mistake meant death. She typed Carter Brooks. The file loaded, and then she saw it. Every field was blank or marked unavailable. Prior employment, unavailable. Military service, unavailable. Emergency contact, Emma Brooks. Daughter, education, unavailable. She tried cross-referencing with HR, got the same restricted access. Tried the background check system they used for security clearances. Access denied. Federal restriction. Authorized personnel only. Victoria sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. How does a janitor have a federally restricted file? She pulled up the security footage from the hangar, found the moment when Carter had been standing near the X-9 Raptor before she'd thrown the mop. The way he positioned himself. The way his eyes tracked the exposed components. The way he moved around the aircraft with unconscious familiarity that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times before. She zoomed in on his hands. The calluses were wrong. Not the pattern you got from pushing mops and emptying trash. The pattern you got from gripping something else. Something that required precision and strength and the kind of muscle memory that didn't fade even when you stopped using it. Victoria closed the laptop and walked to the window. The Fort Worth skyline glittered in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, a man who wasn't supposed to exist was probably tucking his daughter into bed, reading her stories about clouds that looked like mountains and stars that guided pilots home. And Victoria Crane, CEO of Apex Defense Systems, daughter of a general who'd been saved by a ghost, had absolutely no idea what she was looking at. But she was going to find out. Carter's apartment in Arlington was exactly what you'd expect from a single father working nights for minimum wage, cramped, worn, held together by determination and duct tape. 2 bedrooms off Highway I-30 where the traffic noise became white noise if you lived with it long enough. Furniture from Goodwill that had been good quality once, maybe 20 years ago. Emma's drawings taped to every available wall surface, turning cheap drywall into a gallery of aircraft rendered with engineering precision. A photograph on the nightstand in Carter's room. Lauren, 32 years old in the picture, though she'd never see 33. Dark hair, kind eyes, the smile of someone who'd believed the world was fundamentally good, even when cancer was proving her wrong. Carter sat at the kitchen table helping Emma with math homework. Fractions. She was struggling, her small face scrunched with concentration that looked too serious for 8 years old. I don't get it, Daddy. Why do you have to make them have the same bottom number? Carter pulled over her drawing of a jet, pointed to the wings. See how you drew this? You knew the wings had to be the same size on both sides, right? Otherwise the plane wouldn't fly straight. Emma nodded. Fractions are like that. You can't compare them unless they're measuring the same thing. So we change the bottom numbers to make them the same size so we can see which is bigger. He pulled out a piece of cornbread from dinner, broke it into pieces. If I cut this into 4 pieces and give you one that's 1/4, if I cut it into 8 pieces and give you 2 that's 2/8, same amount of cornbread, just different ways of measuring. Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. She worked through the problem, got the answer, looked up at him with a smile that made every humiliation, every hardship, every moment of drowning worth it. I got it. I knew you would, darlin'. Bedtime came at 8:30. Carter tucked Emma into bed, her room decorated with more aircraft drawings and a poster of an F-22 Raptor that she'd gotten from the library's poster sale for $1. Sky story, Daddy. It was their ritual. Had been since she was old enough to understand that some stories didn't have endings, just pauses between the telling. Carter sat on the edge of her bed, began speaking in the voice he used for these stories, third person, distant, like he was recounting something he'd heard rather than lived. The pilot looked up and saw Orion's belt, 3 stars in a perfect line shining through the clouds over West Texas. His compass was broken. The instruments were dead. The radio was giving him nothing but static. But those stars, those 3 stars, they showed him the way home. Emma's eyes were already getting heavy. Her hand reached out, found his, held on. Did he make it home? He always makes it home, sweetheart. Always. She fell asleep mid-story the way she always did. Carter sat there for a moment longer, watching her breathe, this small person who was his entire world compressed into 90 pounds of determination and artistic talent and anxiety that woke her up crying some nights. He moved to his own bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, rolled up his right sleeve. The tattoo looked back at him in the dim light. Iron Eagle wings, Raptor Squadron. The call sign below. Reaper. He'd gotten the tattoo right after his first combat mission. 23 years old and invincible. The other pilots had laughed, called him sentimental. Then they'd all gotten the same tattoo within a week. Brothers in arms. Men who trusted each other with their lives. Most of them were dead now. Training accidents, combat operations. One suicide that nobody talked about, but everybody knew. The ones who survived had scattered Pentagon jobs, contractor positions, early retirement, to places where the sky was big enough that you could pretend you weren't drowning in it. Carter's phone rang. Virginia area code, 703. Pentagon. He knew who it was. Had known the call would come eventually. Some things you couldn't outrun no matter how far you fell or how well you hid. He answered. Reaper. It's been 3 years, brother. Jackson Miller, call sign Viper. The man who'd been Carter's wingman through 7 deployments and more classified missions than either of them were allowed to count. The man whose jet had been on fire over Nevada while Carter talked him down through a sandstorm that should have killed them both. How'd you get this number? Carter's voice was flat, careful, the tone of someone who'd learned that the past didn't let go just because you asked nicely. I'm still in the system. Some things don't change. Carter closed his eyes. Everything changes, Jax. Silence on the line. Then Jax's voice, softer now, carrying something that might have been grief. or might have been understanding. "I heard about Lauren. I'm sorry I didn't call. I didn't know what to say." There wasn't anything to say. There's always something to say. I just didn't have the courage. More silence. The kind that builds between people who've shared cockpits and emergencies and the particular terror of being 20,000 feet up when systems start failing. "I'm coming to the demonstration Friday. Pentagon delegation. I saw your name on the employee roster for Apex Defense." A pause. "Couldn't say no when I realized where you ended up." Carter's chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner, like altitude sickness, except he was sitting in an apartment in Arlington with his daughter asleep in the next room, and the sky nowhere close enough to matter. Don't. Too late. Tickets are booked. Flight lands Thursday night. "Jax, I'm not going to out you, brother. Your secret's safe. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone. You never were." The line went dead. Carter sat in the darkness, phone in his hand, feeling the weight of everything he'd lost and everything he was about to face. Tomorrow, the demonstration. Tomorrow, his past and present would collide in a facility where he mopped floors, and a woman who didn't know his name would stand on a catwalk and prove to a room full of men that she deserved her father's legacy. And somewhere in the machinery and the systems that were supposed to be perfect, Carter had seen something. A flaw. A mistake. The kind of error that would function fine at low altitude, but would kill everyone at 20,000 feet under full military power. He could say nothing. Let the demonstration fail. Let Victoria Crane's career implode in front of cameras and Pentagon officials and board members who were already sharpening their knives. She'd humiliated him, made Emma cry, thrown a mop at his feet like he was something she'd scraped off her expensive shoes. He should let her fail. It would be justice. It would be fair. But test pilots would fly that engine after the demonstration. Young men and women who'd trust these machines with their lives. Families waiting at home watching the sky, praying for safe returns. Carter pulled his sleeve down over the tattoo, lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, where water stains made patterns that looked almost like clouds if you had enough imagination and not enough sleep. Tomorrow, he'd have to choose between revenge and integrity, between the man he used to be and the man he was trying to teach his daughter to respect. Tomorrow, the ghost would have to decide if he was ready to start haunting the living again. The Phoenix Defense Systems testing facility at 11 p.m. was a different world than the chaos of daytime operations. Skeleton crew, quiet hum of diagnostics running on automated systems, security guards playing cards in their booth near the main entrance, and in the center of it all, the X-9 Raptor prototype gleaming under work lights like a promise that hadn't been kept yet. Victoria Crane paced in front of the massive screen displaying engine schematics. She never sat. Sitting suggested satisfaction completion, the idea that you'd arrived somewhere worth staying. Victoria hadn't stopped moving in 6 months. Marcus Chen, chief engineer and Rice University graduate, stood beside the screen with a tablet in his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. His tie was loosened, shirt wrinkled, the appearance of a man who'd been working 18-hour days and sleeping in his office. "We've checked every component 3 times, Ms. Crane. The combustion chamber pressure readings are inconsistent. There's no logical explanation." Victoria's jaw tightened. Her voice came out with Boston precision sharpened by fear she couldn't show. "Then find an illogical one. This demonstration cannot fail. We're running out of time. Friday is 36 hours away. Then work through the night. I don't care if you sleep here. I don't care if you dream in engine schematics. This demonstration goes forward on schedule with perfect results." Chen opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, saw something in Victoria's eyes that suggested arguing would be professionally suicidal, and closed it again. He nodded and turned back to his team. Victoria watched the pressure readings fluctuate on the screen. Small variations. Probably nothing. Possibly everything. In aerospace engineering, probably and possibly were the difference between success and catastrophe. In the background, barely visible near the maintenance bay, a figure in a gray janitor's uniform pushed a cleaning cart past the prototype. He paused for 3 seconds, his eyes tracking something on the exposed engine panel. Then he forced himself to keep walking, hands gripping the cart handle tight enough that his knuckles went white. Victoria didn't notice. She was too focused on the screen on the numbers on the board meeting tomorrow morning, where Richard Hamilton and his coalition of old money would question her decisions and doubt her competence, and wait for her to prove that she was exactly what they expected, Sterling Crane's daughter playing dress-up in her father's office. If this engine fails Friday, I'm done. She said it to Chen, to herself, to the photograph of her father that lived in her office and haunted her decisions. The board will vote me out and install some good old boy who's never built anything in his life but knows how to play golf with the right people. Chen looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. What if we postpone, give us another week to identify the Pentagon is already here. Senator Hutchison is flying in from D.C. tomorrow. CNN has camera crews setting up. We launch on schedule or we lose everything. She turned and walked toward her office, heels clicking against concrete, with the rhythm of someone running out of time and trying not to show it. Behind her, in the quiet space where engineers worked and machines waited to prove their worth, Carter Brooks stood in the facility corridor with a mop in his hands and a decision forming in his chest like pressure building toward an explosion. The corridor was empty, fluorescent lights humming their eternal song. Carter moved the mop across the floor with methodical precision, the kind of precision that came from muscle memory, from doing something so many times that your hands knew the work even when your mind was elsewhere. Walter Jenkins appeared from a side door, limping on the knee he'd destroyed in a helicopter crash at Fort Hood back in 1989. 62 years old, 35 years at Apex Defense, and eyes that had seen enough to recognize when someone was moving wrong for their job description. He sat on an equipment crate and watched Carter work for 30 seconds before speaking. "You move like someone who's been shot at." Carter didn't look up, kept mopping. "Excuse me." "The way you check corners, the way you always position yourself with exits in sight. I was at a gala at Lockheed Martin in 2012. Honoring the Raptor Squadron after some classified mission nobody could talk about." Carter's hands stilled on the mop, just for a second, then continued the careful, controlled movements. "Group photo. 12 pilots. Third from the left had your build. Yurihi, same way of standing like you were calculating blast radius even when you were shaking hands with congressmen." Long silence. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the facility, a diagnostic program beeped completion. "You've got the wrong guy, Mr. Jenkins." Walter stood limped closer. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. "My grandson Tyler, he's 12, lives in Denton with my son, obsessed with jets, dreams of flying F-22s out of Holloman Air Force Base." "That's nice." "His daddy, my son, thinks it's a phase, says he should focus on something practical, maybe get his petroleum engineering degree at UT, play it safe." Walter paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "But I've seen what happens when you clip their wings too early. They spend their whole lives looking up at that big Texas sky, wondering what could have been." Carter finally met his eyes. The two men looked at each other across the corridor, across the distance between a janitor and an engineer, across the space where secrets lived and truth waited. The sky doesn't forget its pilots, and pilots don't forget the sky. Carter's voice came out quiet, carrying weight that had nothing to do with volume. "The sky forgets everyone eventually, Mr. Jenkins. We all fall. Some of us just fall further." Walter nodded slowly, like Carter had just confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "Your secret's safe with me, son, but that woman up there," he gestured toward Victoria's office, "she needs someone who understands what it means to fly to fall, to keep going. Think about it." He walked away, his bad knee making his gait uneven but determined. Carter watched him go, then turned back to his mop and his bucket and the floor that needed cleaning, because floors always needed cleaning, and someone had to do the work that nobody else wanted to do. Except now, he couldn't stop thinking about the engine, about the second exhaust valve that was reversed, about what would happen at 20,000 feet when a test pilot pushed the throttle forward and trusted that the people on the ground had built something that wouldn't kill them. Midnight came, and the engineers went home. The security guards settled into their card game with the dedication of men who'd perfected the art of looking busy while doing nothing. The facility became a cathedral of machines and potential waiting for Friday to prove what it could do. Carter approached the X-9 Raptor from the rear, his cleaning cart abandoned near the maintenance bay. He moved around the aircraft with unconscious familiarity, the walk of someone who'd done pre-flight checks in sandstorms and combat zones, and situations where a quarter-second delay meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The schematic was still projected on the wall, massive and detailed. Carter studied it for exactly 30 seconds. His eyes tracked systems pathways, the flow of fuel and air, and the controlled explosions that would turn metal into flight. Then he saw it. The second exhaust valve. Installation orientation reversed. The valve was designed to regulate pressure by allowing controlled release during thrust variations. If you reversed the orientation, release became restriction. Pressure would build instead of venting. At low altitude, moderate thrust, it would function normally. At 20,000 feet under full military power, the feedback loop would destabilize the combustion chamber. Catastrophic failure in 30 seconds. Maybe less. The memory hit him like shrapnel, sudden, sharp, unavoidable. Nevada desert, 2015. Jax's voice through the radio, calm at first, then edged with panic. I can't see. Instruments are dead. Reaper, I'm going down. Over Nellis. Carter's voice steady despite the fact that his own jet was barely holding together. Stay with me, Viper. I've got you. Follow my voice. The explosion when shrapnel tore through Carter's F-22, the pain in his back like someone had driven a spike through his spine, the choice to stay, to guide Jax down, to refuse to leave even when every instinct screamed that staying meant dying. Present day. Fort Worth. Midnight. A janitor standing in front of a prototype jet with a valve that would kill whoever flew it. Carter's hand went to his lower back, touching the place where nerve damage lived, like a permanent reminder that some choices came with prices you paid forever. He looked at the valve, looked toward Victoria's office where lights still burned, looked at the exit where he could walk away and let Friday happen and watch from a safe distance while karma delivered justice to a woman who'd humiliated him in front of his daughter. She deserved it. She'd earned it. Nobody would blame him. Except the test pilots wouldn't deserve it. The families waiting for them to come home wouldn't deserve it. Emma, who believed her father was a good man, wouldn't understand why he'd let people die when he could have prevented it. Carter stood there, frozen, internal war visible on his face for anyone who might have been watching. But nobody was watching. The guards were playing cards. The engineers were home. Even God seemed to have looked away. Finally, Carter moved. Not toward the exit. Toward the control room where a few engineers were still running diagnostics, still searching for the problem they'd checked 3 times and missed every time because they were looking at components instead of systems. His hand reached for the door, paused, then pushed it open. The engineers looked up surprised to see a janitor in their space at midnight. Marcus Chen stood. You can't be in here. This area is restricted. Carter's voice was calm Texas drawl carrying certainty that didn't match his uniform. I know. But you need to look at the second exhaust valve. It's reversed. Silence. The kind that falls when someone has just said something that makes no sense and perfect sense simultaneously. David Parker, young engineer from Texas A&M with sharp eyes and sharper mind, spoke first. What did you say? The installation team reversed the flow direction on the second exhaust valve. Check the schematic against the actual installation photos. Chen's face went through several expressions: confusion, irritation, the beginning of understanding. That's not possible. We checked every component. You checked the components. You didn't check their orientation relative to flow direction. Carter moved to the screen, pointing at the exhaust pathway with a finger that held steady despite everything. The valve regulates pressure by allowing controlled release during thrust variations. If you reverse the orientation, release becomes restriction. Pressure builds instead of venting. At 20,000 feet under full military power, you've got maybe 30 seconds before catastrophic failure. David was already pulling up installation photos on his tablet, overlaying them against the schematic, with fingers that moved too fast, like he already knew what he was going to find and desperately hoped he was wrong. His face went pale. He's right. Oh my God. The valve is backward. Chen stared at the screen, then at Carter, then back at the screen, like he could make the image change through sheer force of will. How did we miss this? Carter's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. Because you were looking at components, not the system. Easy mistake when you're under pressure and running out of time. Long pause. The diagnostic equipment beeped softly. Somewhere in Fort Worth, people were sleeping unaware that a janitor had just saved lives they would never know were in danger. Chen found his voice. At what altitude would this become critical? 20,000 feet, full military power, 30 seconds before the combustion chamber destabilizes. Every engineer in the room was staring at Carter now. The janitor who knew thrust ratios and pressure systems and exactly what happened when complex machinery failed at altitude. Chen's voice came out quiet, carrying a question that was bigger than the words. Who are you? Carter picked up his mop bucket. The motion was deliberate, a return to the role he'd been playing for 6 months. Nobody. Just the janitor. But you should fix that valve before Friday. He turned toward the door. Chen's voice stopped him. Wait. How did you know to look for that? How did you know what would happen at altitude? Carter stood at the door without turning around, his hand on the frame, his back to the room, his voice carrying something that might have been memory or might have been regret. Lucky guess. Then he was gone, disappearing into the corridor with his bucket and his mop and his secrets intact. For now. Walter was waiting outside the control room, arms crossed, knowing smile on his weathered face. That wasn't a lucky guess. Carter kept walking. I don't know what you're talking about. You just saved that demonstration. Maybe saved lives. And you're going to walk away like it was nothing. It was nothing. I saw a problem. I pointed it out. Anyone could have done it. Anyone didn't. You did. Walter caught up his bad knee, making him move faster than was comfortable. Carter stopped, turned, and for the first time tonight there was something in his face that looked almost like surrender. Mr. Jenkins, I need you to keep this quiet. I can't have people knowing. Who you used to be, I already told you. Your secret's safe. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 men in a corridor in Fort Worth at midnight carrying different kinds of weight. Carter pulled up his right sleeve. The tattoo emerged from shadow into fluorescent light iron eagle wings rendered with precision that matched the aircraft they represented. Raptor Squadron beneath, the call sign below, that Reaper. Walter stared. His breath came out slow, like he was looking at something he'd only heard about in stories. My God, it really is you. Ghost. Carter's face remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested pain that had nothing to do with his back. That pilot is dead, Mr. Jenkins. He died in the desert with his wingman's jet burning beside him. What's left is just a father trying to take care of his daughter. Walter's voice was soft, carrying respect that felt almost like reverence. That pilot isn't dead. He's just sleeping. And he just saved everyone in that hangar. Carter pulled his sleeve down, covering the wings, hiding the evidence of who he used to be. No one can know. Please. My daughter needs to see that you can be ordinary and still matter, that you don't have to be a hero to have worth. You can't help being what you are, son. Watch me. Carter walked away into darkness. Walter stayed behind, watching him go, torn between respect for the secret and the growing certainty that secrets this big had a way of destroying themselves from the inside out. Tomorrow the valve would be fixed. Tomorrow the demonstration would succeed because a janitor had seen what engineers missed. Tomorrow Victoria Crane would stand in front of Pentagon officials and prove she deserved her father's legacy without ever knowing that the ghost her father had searched for was the same man she'd humiliated 6 hours earlier. Tomorrow, everything would go exactly according to plan. Until it didn't. Dawn broke over Fort Worth with the kind of light that promised heat by midday. Victoria Crane arrived at her office before 6, same clothes from yesterday, because going home meant admitting she needed rest, and rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The email from Marcus Chen was waiting in her inbox, time-stamped 2:47 a.m. Critical flaw identified by maintenance staff. Valve reversed. Fixing immediately. Demonstration greenlit. Maintenance staff. Victoria read the words 3 times, trying to make them mean something other than what they clearly stated. A janitor had found the flaw that 15 engineers with advanced degrees had missed. She pulled up the security footage, fingers moving fast across her laptop keyboard. Found the timestamp from last night. Watched Carter Brooks standing motionless in front of the X9 Raptor, his eyes tracking the exposed engine components with an intensity that didn't belong to someone whose job was emptying trash bins. His posture was wrong. Military straight, weight balanced on the balls of his feet like someone ready to move in any direction without warning, the way he circled the aircraft, unconscious familiarity, the kind that came from repetition measured in years, not months. Victoria zoomed in on his hands where they rested briefly on the fuselage. The calluses were visible even through the grainy footage. Wrong placement for janitorial work. Right placement for someone who'd spent years gripping flight controls under conditions where precision meant survival. She pulled up his employee file again, stared at the blank fields and federal restrictions. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, dialed HR directly. I need a complete background check on Carter Brooks, janitor night shift. I don't care what it costs or who you have to call. The HR director's voice came back uncertain. Ms. Crane, I tried yesterday. His file has federal restrictions I've never seen before. Even my contact at the Pentagon hit a wall. What kind of wall? The kind that comes with polite suggestions to stop asking questions. Victoria hung up, opened her laptop again, ran Carter's name through 3 private databases. Nexus, a contractor system her college roommate at Georgetown had access to, and finally through a former CIA analyst who owed her father a favor large enough that he couldn't refuse. All 3 came back the same. Access denied. Not no records found. Not insufficient information. Access denied in red text, like a door slamming in her face. Victoria sat back in her chair, watching the sunrise paint Fort Worth in shades of orange that looked almost like fire if you had the wrong kind of imagination. Somewhere in this city, a man who shouldn't exist was probably making breakfast for his daughter. Getting her ready for school, living a life so ordinary, it was invisible. Except nothing about Carter Brooks was ordinary. Everything about him was carefully constructed to look that way. Victoria pulled up the photograph of her father and the blurred pilot, looked at the Iron Eagle insignia, then back at the security footage of Carter standing beside the prototype like he owned it. The pieces were there, she just couldn't see how they fit together yet. But she would. Before Friday's demonstration, before her career imploded or solidified, before whatever was coming arrived and changed everything. She had 36 hours. The Apex Defense parking lot at 7:30 a.m. was already filling with engineers arriving for the final push before Friday. Carter's Ford F-150 was pulling into a space near the back, the spaces nobody wanted, because they required walking an extra 100 yards when Victoria's BMW cut across 2 lanes and blocked him in. She got out, heels clicking on asphalt still cool from the night, and walked toward his truck with the determined stride of someone who'd decided that politeness was a luxury she no longer needed. Small crowd of arriving workers slowed down, phones coming out, sensing something was about to happen worth recording. Carter climbed out of his truck, closed the door carefully, turned to face her with that same Texas calm that made his earlier humiliation look almost like patience instead of submission. "How did you know?" Victoria's voice carried across the parking lot, sharp with Boston precision and something that might have been desperation if she'd allowed herself to feel it. "About the valve, the pressure readings, what happens at altitude." "I told your engineers. Lucky guess." That wasn't luck. That was experience. That was someone who's seen engines fail at 20,000 feet. Carter pulled his keys from his pocket, made to move around her toward the facility. Victoria stepped into his path. "My father had a photograph in his office. A pilot shaking his hand after a rescue mission in Nevada. The insignia on that pilot's chest, Iron Eagle wings, Raptor Squadron." Carter's jaw tightened, but his face stayed neutral. The mask he'd been wearing for 6 months, refusing to crack even under direct assault. "Same insignia your daughter drew in her notebook yesterday. Same insignia that's been classified since 2015 when the entire squadron was disbanded after a training incident nobody will talk about. Children have imaginations, Ms. Crane. Children don't draw fuel injection systems with accurate pressure ratios unless someone teaches them. Children don't understand thrust-to-weight calculations." Carter moved to open his truck door again. Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. The sleeve pulled up slightly, and she saw at the edge of something dark against his skin. The beginning of wings rendered in ink, the start of text she couldn't quite read. Carter yanked his arm away, pulling the sleeve down, but not before Victoria's eyes went wide with recognition. That was half certainty and half hope. "Who are you?" The question came out quieter now, less accusation and more genuine need to understand. Carter met her eyes. His voice was calm, but underneath it ran something that sounded almost like exhaustion. "A janitor, a single father, a man trying to keep his head down and take care of his daughter. That's all I am now. That's all I want to be." That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. He moved past her toward the facility. Victoria called after him, Boston accent sharp enough to cut. "I'm going to find out. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're running from, I'm going to find out." Carter stopped, didn't turn around. His voice carried back across the parking lot with finality that felt like a door closing. "Then you'll waste a lot of time, ma'am. I suggest you spend it fixing your demonstration instead." He walked away. Victoria stood there, surrounded by engineers with phone cameras and whispers spreading like fire, watching a man who moved like a ghost disappear into a building where he'd been invisible for 6 months. But ghosts left traces. They disturbed the air. They showed up on instruments designed to detect disturbances in systems that were supposed to be stable. Victoria was very good with instruments, and she was running out of time to find the disturbance before Friday proved whether she deserved her father's legacy or was just playing dress-up in a dead man's office. The memory came unbidden, triggered by Victoria's words about Nevada and rescue missions and pilots who disappeared. Carter tried to push it away, but it arrived anyway. Vivid and sharp as the day it happened. Nevada desert, 2015. Sandstorm raging with wind speeds that grounded every helicopter from Nellis Air Force Base. General Robert Crane's convoy stranded 15 miles outside Las Vegas radio, dead 1 man bleeding from shrapnel, 0 visibility in any direction. The rescue choppers couldn't fly. Regulations said you didn't fly in winds above 40 knots. The storm was pushing 60, gusting to 75, turning sand into weapons that could strip paint from metal and hope from hearts. Carter's voice on the emergency frequency comm like he was ordering coffee instead of flying through conditions that violated every safety protocol ever written. Rescue. 6. This is Reaper. I have visual on convoy, guiding you in. The rescue pilot's voice barely audible through static. Reaper abort. You can't maintain heading in this soup. Negative. They don't have time. Follow my transponder. Carter's F-22 Raptor cutting through the sandstorm like it was nothing like physics was optional, like the sky would bend for him because he asked nicely and meant it with everything he had. He landed 200 yards from the convoy, climbed out of the cockpit into wind that tried to knock him flat, ran through sand that was trying to bury everything, reached General Crane, and his men helped load the injured into the rescue chopper when it finally arrived, guided by Carter's unwavering signal. Incoming fire from hostiles using the storm as cover, rounds impacting around them. One caught Carter in the lower back, tearing through his flight suit, lodging against his spine with surgical precision designed to destroy nerves without quite killing him. He fell. General Crane caught him, this man he'd never met whose convoy had been in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. What's your name, son? Carter, bleeding, barely conscious, the pain in his back already suggesting that flying might be over forever. Doesn't matter, sir. Just get home to your daughter at MIT. She needs you. General Crane staring at him with an expression Carter would never forget. Gratitude mixed with something that looked like he'd just seen God in a flight suit and wasn't sure how to process it. I'll find you. I owe you everything. Carter's F-22 taking off through the storm exhaust flash illuminating his torn sleeve, the tattoo visible for just a moment before sand and distance swallowed everything. General Crane watching the jet disappear, hand pressed to his chest where Carter's blood had soaked through, whispering words that would echo through 9 years and end in a Fort Worth parking lot, with his daughter staring at a janitor who'd just saved her demonstration. Iron Eagles. I'll find you. Present day. Carter walking through the Apex facility toward his cleaning supplies. The memory refusing to leave, the pain in his back a constant reminder that some rescues came with prices you paid in installments that never quite finished. General Crane had tried to find him, had succeeded, eventually tracked him down 2 years after Nevada, when Carter was already out of the Air Force, already watching Lauren die in Parkland Hospital, already learning that the world didn't have much use for pilots who couldn't fly. The general had offered everything, money, position, a job at his company that would have paid more than Carter had ever earned. Carter had refused, not out of pride, out of exhaustion, out of the bone-deep certainty that he was done being someone other people pointed at and called hero. He'd wanted to be ordinary, to disappear, to raise his daughter in peace. And now General Crane's daughter was standing in a parking lot asking questions that would unravel everything Carter had built from the wreckage of his old life. Friday was coming. Jax was coming. The demonstration was coming. And somewhere in the machinery of coincidence and consequence, the past was catching up with a speed that suggested running was no longer an option. Emma's school in Grand Prairie sat off Highway 360, surrounded by Texas flags and playground equipment that had been new when Carter was young. He pulled up at 3:30, watching other parents collect their children, the ordinary rhythm of ordinary lives that he wanted more than anything he'd ever wanted when he could fly. Emma climbed into this truck backpack heavy with books she'd actually read because she'd inherited her mother's love of stories and Carter's determination to understand how things worked. "Have a good day, darlin'. Mrs. Peterson said my drawing was the best she'd ever seen from a 3rd grader. She asked where I learned to draw like they." Carter pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the facility where his shift started in 30 minutes. "What did you tell her?" "That my daddy teaches me. That we look at pictures of planes and he explains how everything works." "That's good, sweetheart. That's exactly right. Emma was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Texas landscape sliding past strip malls and chain restaurants, and the kind of development that turned everywhere into nowhere if you didn't pay attention to the details. "Daddy, that lady yesterday, the mean one, why did she say those things?" Carter's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd known this question was coming, had been preparing answers since the moment Victoria threw the mop at his feet. Sometimes people act mean when they're scared. What's she scared of? Failing, not being good enough, letting down people who believed in her. Emma processed this with the seriousness that 8-year-olds brought to concepts they were just beginning to understand. "Are you scared of those things?" Carter looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. This small person who was his entire world compressed into 90 pounds and questions he couldn't always answer. "Every day, darlin'. Every single day. But you show up anyway. That's what brave people do. They show up even when they're scared." Emma nodded like this made perfect sense, like her father had just explained fractions using cornbread instead of revealing the fundamental truth of his existence. They arrived at the facility. Carter settled Emma in the break room with Betty Morrison, the 55-year-old supervisor who'd taken a liking to his daughter and treated her like the granddaughter she'd never had. "You stay with Mrs. Morrison today, in the break room, no leaving." Emma's face scrunched with confusion. "But Daddy, you always let me—" "Not today, sweetheart. Today I need you to promise me, stay here, no matter what, promise." Something in his voice made her stop arguing. Something that suggested this wasn't a request, it was survival. "I promise, Daddy." He kissed her forehead, holding her just a moment longer than usual, like he could feel Friday coming, and knew that promises made by 8-year-olds were sometimes harder to keep than promises made by men who'd flown through sandstorms. The demonstration was scheduled for 5 p.m. By 3 o'clock, the facility had transformed into something else entirely. Bleachers erected around the testing pad, CNN camera crews setting up equipment, Pentagon banners hanging from the rafters like religious iconography for the Church of American Military Superiority. Secret Service agents moved through the crowd with earpieces and suspicious eyes. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison's advance team checked sightlines and exit routes. Board members from Apex Defense arrived in vehicles that cost more than Carter's truck would ever be worth, their faces carrying the expression of men who'd bet against Victoria and were waiting to collect. Carter pushed his cleaning cart through the chaos, invisible in his gray uniform, watching everything with the awareness that had kept him alive through 7 deployments and more classified missions than the government wanted anyone counting. Across the hangar, he saw him. Jackson Miller, call sign Viper, Pentagon procurement officer, now standing with the delegation in a suit that looked uncomfortable on a man who'd spent 15 years in flight suits. 38 years old and still carrying himself like someone ready to eject at altitude. Their eyes met across 50 yards of concrete and machinery and 9 years of silence. Jax's face went through shock grief, understanding all in the space of 3 seconds. He started moving toward Carter, cutting through the crowd with purpose. Carter turned and disappeared into the maintenance area, heart pounding with the kind of fear he hadn't felt since the desert. Not fear of death, fear of being seen. Fear of having the ordinary life he'd built torn apart by recognition he'd spent 3 years avoiding. He found Walter in the corridor, the old engineer looking at him with eyes that knew too much and cared too much to use the knowledge wrong. "Everything's set." Walter nodded. "Valves fixed. Diagnostics are green. But Jax Miller is here. He's looking for you." "I know. What are you going to do?" Carter looked toward the hangar where his past and present were about to collide with enough force to destroy everything. "My job. Stay invisible. Hope he respects why." But hope was a poor strategy. Carter had learned that in the desert, when hoping for good weather got people killed, you didn't hope, You planned, you adapted. You accepted that some situations had no good outcomes, and you chose the least bad option available. The problem was he couldn't see the least bad option anymore. Every direction led to exposure or failure or watching people die because he'd chosen his anonymity over their safety. Friday was here, the demonstration was starting in 2 hours, and somewhere in the machinery of consequence, Carter Brooks was about to learn that you couldn't outrun the past forever. Some debts followed you home no matter how far you fell. Victoria stood at the podium wearing confidence like armor. The crowd of 200 watched her Pentagon officials taking notes, press recording every word, board members waiting for her to prove them right or wrong about whether Sterling Crane's daughter deserved to stand where her father had stood. Her voice carried across the hangar, with Boston precision sharpened by 6 months of proving herself and 36 hours without sleep. Apex Defense Systems represents the future of American aerospace innovation. The X-9 Raptor engine before you will revolutionize combat aviation, extending range by 40% while reducing emissions by 30%. Today, we prove that American ingenuity still leads the world. Applause. Measured, professional. The kind that came from people who'd seen too many promises to trust words until hardware delivered. Victoria stepped back. The engineers activated the X-9 Raptor. The engine roared to life with a sound that shook the Texas ground that reminded everyone present why humans had been obsessed with flight since the first time someone looked at birds and felt envy in their bones. For 90 seconds, everything was perfect. Pressure readings steady. Fuel burn efficient. Thrust output exceeding projections by 12%. The engineers were smiling. The Pentagon delegation was leaning forward with interest. Even Richard Hamilton looked like he might have to admit Victoria had succeeded. Carter watched from the maintenance bay, his hands gripping a mop handle that had become an anchor to reality. The valve was fixed, the systems were stable. Friday had arrived, and the demonstration was going exactly according to warning light. Not the valve. Different system. Secondary cooling. Carter's chest tightened. He moved toward the control room, but it was already too late. The cascade was starting, the kind of failure that happened when systems were pushed beyond design specifications and backup systems weren't quite backup enough. Alarms. Red lights flashing across control panels. Smoke pouring from the engine compartment, not the combustion chamber, the auxiliary system's thermal runaway and cooling that was supposed to prevent exactly this scenario. Marcus Chen's voice cutting through the noise. "Shut it down." Another engineer, younger, panicked. "Emergency shutdown is linked to secondary cooling. If we trigger it now, the pressure spike." The explosion cut off his words. Not the main engine. The fuel line. A spark from the overheating auxiliary system found vapor that shouldn't have been there. And physics did what physics always did when you gave it fuel and oxygen and ignition. Fire erupted across the testing pad. The crowd became a living thing driven by terror. People screaming, running security, trying to maintain order, while Secret Service agents grabbed the senator and moved her toward exits. CNN cameras still filming because disaster was better footage than success, and everyone knew it. Victoria frozen at the podium, watching her career burn with flames that turned the Texas afternoon into something that looked like war. And through the smoke, through the chaos, through the screaming and the panic and the fire suppression system that was activating too slowly, Carter saw her. Emma. She wasn't in the break room. She was at the edge of the testing area, 30 yards from the fire notebook, clutched to her chest, frozen with terror so complete she couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only stand there while the fire spread toward her with hunger that didn't care about innocence or promises or 8-year-old girls who drew jets with perfect precision. Carter's world stopped, then restarted with singular focus that erased everything except the space between him and his daughter, and the fire that wanted to take her away. He ran, vaulted the safety barrier without thinking, without calculating, without anything except the animal certainty that she was his, and nothing else mattered. Grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, mount his body moving on autopilot muscle memory from situations where hesitation meant death. Victoria's voice somewhere behind him. "Someone stop him!" But nobody moved. Everyone was running away. Only Carter ran toward sprinting directly into flames that reached for him like they recognized something in him they wanted to claim. Jax's voice cutting through the chaos. "Reaper, no!" Carter reached Emma just as a secondary explosion sent debris spinning through the air. Metal fragments impacted around them. One piece cut his arm, tearing through fabric and skin, but he barely felt it because Emma was there and nothing else registered except keeping her alive. He threw himself over her, covering her body completely. Heat pressed against them like a physical thing, trying to compress them into nothing. The fire extinguisher created a temporary barrier of foam and chemicals, just enough space to breathe, just enough time to move. He scooped Emma into his arms. She was limp, barely conscious, terror having shut down everything except the most basic survival functions. 40 yards to the exit, his back screaming with every step, the old injury from Nevada awakening with vengeance, nerves firing signals that said, "Stop," said, "rest," said, "You can't do this anymore." He kept running, vision tunneling, the world reducing to door ahead and weight in arms and the simple math of survival. Fire suppression activated. Water and foam raining down, turning smoke to steam, creating fog that made the last 10 yards nearly blind. Carter burst through the emergency exit and collapsed onto concrete, Emma safe in his arms but his body refusing to cooperate anymore. Pain in his back. Catastrophic. Consuming the kind that suggested he'd just broken something that wasn't going to heal. This time. Emma, crying against his chest. "Daddy, Daddy, are you okay?" He couldn't answer. The world was going gray, sound muffling everything, slipping toward darkness that felt almost peaceful compared to the fire. Footsteps running toward them. Multiple voices. Hands on his shoulders, rolling him carefully onto his back. Victoria's face above him. Makeup, destroyed mask completely gone, her eyes showing something that looked almost human. "Mr. Brooks, can you hear me? Stay with me." Carter tried to speak. Only one word came out, barely audible. "Lauren," Emma's voice stronger. "He means my mom." Her name was Lauren. Victoria's expression shifted to something gentle. "Emma, he's going to be okay. I promise." Emma crying harder now. "Daddy, your arm." Victoria looked. Her breath stopped. The sleeve was torn from shoulder to elbow, ripped by shrapnel during the rescue. Exposed completely now was the tattoo she'd glimpsed in the parking lot but never seen whole. Iron eagle wings, intricate detail, professional work, Raptor Squadron beneath in perfect military font. Below that, the call sign, Reaper. Victoria stared at the tattoo like it was a message written in a language she'd been trying to learn her entire life. Her lips moved soundlessly. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever came next. More people gathering. Pentagon delegation pushing through. Board members forming a circle. Press cameras capturing everything. Jax Miller dropped to his knees beside Carter, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "Reaper, Jesus Christ, it really is you." Carter's eyes focused through pain. "Jax, get Emma out of here. I've got her, brother. I've got her." Jax looked at the tattoo, at Emma, crying at Victoria's shock at the crowd that was forming. He stood turning to face Victoria, his voice carrying to everyone present with authority that came from 15 years of military service and rage that came from watching his brother suffer in silence. "This is Captain Carter Brooks, call sign Reaper, Raptor Squadron, United States Air Force, the pilot who saved General Robert Crane in Nevada 2015. Murmurs through the crowd. CNN cameras swinging toward them. The demonstration forgotten in favor of something better. A hero revealed a secret, exposed a story that would lead the news cycle for days. Jax's voice broke with anger. The pilot who stayed with his wingman when everyone else ran. The pilot who took shrapnel that should have killed him because he refused to leave anyone behind. He paused, looking directly at Victoria. The pilot you've been treating like dirt for 6 months. Victoria staggered backward like she'd been hit. Richard Hamilton pushed forward from the board, his face showing confusion and calculation, and the beginning of understanding that the narrative was slipping away from his control. What's the meaning of this? Jax turned on him with contempt. Meaning Apex Defense just watched its janitor save lives while your executive stood frozen. That's the meaning. Medics arrived with a stretcher. Carter grabbed Jax's arm with what little strength remained. Take care of Emma. Don't let her be alone. She's all I have. She won't be alone, brother. I swear it. Promise me. I promise. On my life. Victoria's voice barely audible through the chaos. Your father. You saved my father. Carter being loaded onto the stretcher, consciousness. Fading words coming out disconnected. I saved a good man. Didn't know he had a daughter who'd... He passed out before finishing. The medics rushed him toward the ambulance. Victoria stood in the ruins of her demonstration, surrounded by smoke and foam and the wreckage of everything she'd built over 6 months, staring at the space where a janitor had been revealed as something else entirely. Jax carried Emma toward his rental car, turned back to Victoria with words that would echo through whatever came next. If he dies, it's on you. All of this is on you. The ambulance doors closed, sirens wailing, Carter Brooks disappearing toward Medical City, Fort Worth, while behind him a facility burned and a woman realized she'd been standing beside a ghost for 6 months without ever seeing him at all. The ambulance doors closed on Carter's unconscious form, Emma's terrified face, and Jax Miller's promise that carried weight nobody could measure yet. Victoria stood in the ruins, literally smoke still rising from the destroyed prototype foam covering concrete like artificial snow, CNN cameras capturing her failure in high definition for the world to judge. Richard Hamilton materialized beside her, his face showing the satisfaction of a man who'd bet correctly on someone else's disaster. My office. Now. Victoria looked at him with eyes that had stopped caring about his authority, somewhere between watching a janitor run through fire and learning that janitor was the ghost her father had searched for until the day he died. Give me an hour. You don't have an hour. The board wants, then the board can wait. She walked to her BMW, hands shaking for the first time since she'd learned that showing weakness was the fastest way to lose everything. Got in. Drove not toward the office, but toward the Trinity River overlook, where Fort Worth pretended it had something worth looking at besides concrete and oil money. She sat on a public bench, still wearing her soot-stained suit, pulled out her phone, and did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She called her mother in Boston. Victoria, it's 4 in the afternoon on a Friday. Did Dad ever find him? Silence on the line. Her mother's voice came back different, softer. Find who, sweetheart? The pilot. The one who saved him in Nevada. The one he talked about when he'd had too much bourbon and thought I wasn't listening. Her mother's breath caught audibly. He tried. For years. But the pilot had left the Air Force. No forwarding address. It was like he'd disappeared deliberately. Victoria watched the Trinity River pretend to be something more than a drainage ditch with ambitions. I found him, Mom. He's been working for me, for 6 months, as a janitor. The story came out in pieces. The humiliation, the valve, the demonstration, the fire. Emma frozen in terror. Carter, running toward death without hesitation. The tattoo that proved everything her father had believed about courage and sacrifice, and men who did the right thing without needing recognition. Her mother listened without interrupting, the way she'd learned to do during 30 years married to a general who brought war home in his silences. "What are you going to do?" Victoria looked at her reflection in the phone's black screen, saw her father's face staring back, heard his voice from a memory she'd tried to forget. Real strength isn't dominance, Victoria. It's lifting people up. "I'm going to make it right." "The board won't let you." "Then I'll go around the board." She hung up. Drove to Medical City, Fort Worth. Found Jax Miller in the waiting room with Emma asleep in a chair beside him. The girl's face still red from crying, but peaceful now, in the way children could be peaceful, even after trauma. Jack saw her coming and stood his body language suggesting he might physically remove her if she tried to get closer. "How is he?" Jax's voice was cold. "In surgery. Spinal injury from 2015 was severely aggravated. They don't know if he'll walk the same. They don't know if he'll walk at all." Victoria sat down heavily across from them, not asking permission, just taking the space because standing felt impossible. "I didn't know. About his wife. About what he's been through. Would it have mattered if you did?" The question hung between them like smoke. Victoria wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that knowing Carter's history would have changed how she treated him, but honesty was the only currency that meant anything right now. "I don't know. I was so focused on proving I deserved my father's company that I stopped seeing people as human. I stopped seeing anything except threats to my position." Jack studied her with eyes that had watched his best friend fall from hero to invisible in the span of a training accident and a wife's death. He lost everything. His wife Lauren died at Parkland Hospital 3 years ago. Leukemia. He held her hand but couldn't stop shaking because of the nerve damage in his back. She apologized. Can you believe that? She apologized for dying. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she couldn't stop. He spent 2 years drowning in medical bills, lost their house in Arlington, lost every piece of the life they'd built, ended up here because Emma needed stability, because being a good father mattered more than being anything else. Jax leaned forward, voice dropping to something that might have been plea or might have been warning. Every extra penny goes to Emma's therapy, anxiety from watching her mother die. That's why he works nights so he can be there when she gets home from school. That's why he never complained when you humiliated him. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. You saw a janitor and decided he didn't matter. But he matters more than your engines, your demonstrations, your billion-dollar contracts. He matters because he's human and he deserves dignity. Victoria wiped her face, mascara ruining what was left of her professional appearance. "What can I do?" Jax's expression didn't soften. "You can start by getting out of this waiting room. He doesn't want to see you." Victoria nodded, started to stand, then stopped, something breaking open in her chest that felt like the moment before a building collapses. "My father searched for him for 9 years. Until the day he died, he was trying to find the pilot who'd saved his life, trying to thank him, trying to repay a debt he said couldn't be measured in money or medals or anything the world valued." She looked at Emma, sleeping, this small person who'd nearly died because her father had kept a promise that mattered more than safety. "Tell him when he wakes up. Tell him my father knew that the best people are the ones who do the right thing without needing the world to see. Tell him I'm sorry I forgot that." She left before Jax could respond, walked to her car, drove to the office where Richard Hamilton and his coalition were waiting to vote her out to install someone who'd never built anything, to prove that women in their 30s couldn't handle leadership positions in industries that belonged to men with gray hair and oil money. She walked into the boardroom at 8 p.m. wearing the same destroyed suit, smelling like smoke, looking like she'd lost a war. Which she had, just not the one they thought. The boardroom held 12 men who represented old Texas money, military contracts, and the fundamental belief that the world worked best when people knew their place. Richard Hamilton sat at the head of the table like a king presiding over an execution he'd orchestrated with perfect precision. Explain the failure. Victoria remained standing. Secondary cooling system experienced unpredictable cascade failure. Primary systems held. Fire was contained within 7 minutes. No fatalities. Hamilton's voice carried the oil-smooth certainty of someone who'd never built anything but knew how to acquire what others created. No fatalities because your janitor ran through fire to save his child. A child who shouldn't have been in the facility during a classified demonstration. She was in supervised care. She was in a combat zone. Because you turned a controlled demonstration into a disaster that's leading every news cycle from here to Washington. Another board member, Houston Money with investments in every defense contractor between Dallas and the Gulf. The Pentagon is reconsidering the contract. CNN is calling it Apex's Chernobyl. Stock dropped 12% in 3 hours. Hamilton leaned forward like a preacher delivering judgment. Your father never had a failure like this. Victoria felt something crack open inside her. Not weakness, but the opposite. The certainty that came from having nothing left to lose except the truth. My father isn't here. I am. And I take full responsibility for the demonstration failure. She paused, looking at each board member in turn. But I also take full responsibility for hiring a janitor who saved lives today, who identified a critical flaw 3 days ago that would have killed test pilots, who showed more courage in 30 seconds than anyone in this room has shown in 30 years. Hamilton's face darkened. That's not. Captain Carter Brooks, call sign Reaper, Raptor Squadron, the pilot who saved my father's life in Nevada, the man Dad searched for until the day he died, the man I humiliated and dismissed because I was so terrified of failing that I stopped seeing people as human. The room went silent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the name from classified briefings they weren't supposed to remember. Victoria's voice strengthened Boston accent, sharpening into something that sounded almost like her father when he'd decided a hill was worth dying on. Today, a man showed more integrity than anyone at this table. He saw a problem and fixed it. He saw danger and ran toward it. He sacrificed his body, maybe his ability to walk, to save his daughter while we stood watching. She leaned forward, hands flat on the table. You want to fire me, fine, but don't pretend it's about the demonstration. It's because you never believed a woman could do what my father did. You've been waiting 6 months for me to fail, so you could install someone who looks like you and thinks like you, and will slowly destroy everything Dad built while protecting your investments. Hamilton stood. This board will not tolerate. This board will listen. Victoria pulled out her laptop, turned it so the screen faced the board. Security footage from 3 months ago. Richard Hamilton in his office after hours on the phone with someone the recording had captured perfectly. The secondary cooling system I told you underfunded. Not enough to be obvious, just enough that it'll fail under stress. Then we vote her out, install Morrison, and redirect those R&D funds to the contracts that actually make us money. The room exploded, board members talking over each other, Hamilton's face going from red to pale to something that looked like trapped. That recording is inadmissible. It's evidence that you deliberately sabotaged my demonstration to justify removing me, that you endangered lives to protect your position, that you've been embezzling from R&D budgets for 2 years. Victoria had spent the last hour in her car doing what she should have done 6 months ago, actually looking at the financials instead of trusting that the board her father had assembled was acting in good faith. The patterns were there once you knew to look. Money redirected from critical systems. Contracts awarded to companies Hamilton had stakes in. A slow, systematic dismantling of everything Sterling Crane had built, disguised as prudent financial management. The Houston investor found his voice first. "Richard, is this true?" Hamilton's silence was answer enough. Victoria closed the laptop. "I'm calling a vote, right now, on Richard Hamilton's position as board chair, on his continued membership on this board, and on whether Apex Defense Systems continues my father's vision of innovation and integrity, or becomes another defense contractor that values stock prices over the lives of pilots who trust our equipment." She looked at each board member again, seeing them clearly for the first time not as enemies, but as men who'd followed Hamilton because nobody had given them a better option. "My father believed that the best people are the ones who do the right thing when nobody's watching. Today you all watched a janitor prove that principle. Now you get to decide if you believe it too." The vote wasn't unanimous. 3 board members stood with Hamilton loyalty or corruption binding them to decisions they'd made years ago. But 9 voted for removal. 9 voted for investigation. 9 voted to give Sterling Crane's daughter the chance her father would have given her if cancer hadn't claimed him before he could see what she'd become. Hamilton was escorted from the building by security, his threats about lawyers and lawsuits echoing down hallways that would never hear his voice again. Victoria walked to her father's office, and stared at the photograph of the pilot whose face was blurred but whose courage was crystal clear. "I found him, Dad, and I almost destroyed him, but I'm going to make it right." She picked up the phone, made 3 calls, the first to the best spinal surgeons at Mayo Clinic, the second to her personal attorney about establishing a trust fund, the third to Jax Miller asking if Carter was awake yet. He wasn't. The board meeting had come first while Carter was still unconscious in ICU. His surgery was scheduled for the next morning, 7 hours of delicate work to repair nerve damage that had been waiting 9 years for proper treatment. But when he woke, she'd be ready with everything she'd denied him for 6 months. Starting with the truth about what his courage had meant to a man who'd died still searching for the chance to say thank you. 72 hours later, Carter opened his eyes to afternoon light streaming through hospital blinds, and his daughter's face above him red-eyed but smiling with relief so complete it looked almost painful. "Daddy, you've been sleeping so long." His voice came out rough, unused. "Hey, darlin'." Emma threw herself against his chest as carefully as an 8-year-old could manage when every instinct said squeeze tighter. She was sobbing now, 3 days of terror releasing all at once. "I'm so sorry. I promised to stay in the break room. I promised, but I wanted to see the jet and I broke my promise and you got hurt and—" "Stop, baby. Look at me." She pulled back, face wet and red and full of guilt that didn't belong to children. "You're safe. That's all that matters. But you got hurt because of me. I got hurt protecting you. There's a difference." He pulled her close again, ignoring the pain that shot through his back with the movement. Some things mattered more than pain. Some things mattered more than walking or flying or anything the world could take from you. "I would do it again, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. Because you're my daughter and there's nothing I wouldn't do to keep you safe." Emma cried harder, but differently now, relief instead of guilt, understanding instead of fear. Carter looked around the room, saw blue bonnets on the windowsill, cards stacked on the table, balloons with messages he couldn't read from this angle. The room of someone who mattered to more people than he'd realized. Who? Everyone, Daddy. The engineers sent flowers. The workers from the facility. Even some board people. And Miss Crane, she's been here every day. Carter's expression shifted. Victoria Crane. Yeah, Mr. Jax won't let her come in. But she sits in the waiting room. Sometimes I see her through the window. She looks sad. Before Carter could process this, the door opened. Jax entered, followed by a surgeon in scrubs who carried the confident air of someone who'd done this speech enough times to have it memorized. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Baylor Medical School, 15 years specializing in spinal trauma. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by something large and unforgiving." "That's accurate. Your spinal injury from 2015 was severely aggravated. Nerve damage was extensive. We performed a 7-hour surgery to repair what we could." Carter's chest tightened. "Will I walk?" Dr. Chen pulled up a chair, sat so they were at eye level. "With extensive physical therapy, you should regain full mobility. The surgery was successful, but it's going to take time and work." Relief flooded through Carter so completely he felt lightheaded. "How long?" 3 months minimum. 6 to be safe. But you're Air Force captain. You know how to push through pain." The title landed like shrapnel. Carter looked at Jax, who shrugged with something that might have been apology. "The whole world knows now, brother. CNN's been running the story non-stop. Hero janitor revealed as decorated pilot. You're trending on every platform that exists." Carter closed his eyes. The anonymity he'd built over 3 years destroyed in 30 seconds of fire and revelation. "Emma is handling it better than you think. Kids at school think she's cool now. Her drawings are all over the news." The door opened again. Victoria stood there looking nothing like the CEO who'd thrown a mop 6 days ago. Jeans from Target. Simple blouse. Hair down. No makeup. Dark circles under eyes that suggested sleep had been optional. Jack stood. "I told you he doesn't let her in." Carter's voice was quiet but carried authority that Jax recognized from missions where Carter's calm had been the only thing keeping them alive. Jax left, taking Emma with him. "Come on, kiddo, let's get some real food from somewhere that isn't a hospital cafeteria." Victoria stood by the door, uncertain in a way that suggested uncertainty wasn't something she'd allowed herself to feel in years. "Why are you here?" "Because I was wrong. About you. About what strength means. About who deserves respect." She moved closer, stopped at the foot of his bed. "My father searched for you for 9 years. Until the day he died, he was trying to find the pilot who saved his life. Trying to say thank you. Trying to repay a debt he said couldn't be measured." Carter's throat tightened. "You don't owe me. You were right in front of me for 6 months. And I was too blind to see because I was so terrified of failing that I turned into exactly what I hated, someone who measured people by their position instead of their character." She told him about the board meeting, about Hamilton's sabotage, about the vote that had saved her position, and exposed the corruption that had been eating the company from inside. "But none of that matters if I don't make this right with you." Carter looked at this woman who'd humiliated him and was now standing in his hospital room, looking more human than he'd thought possible. "Why did you treat me that way?" Victoria's face crumpled slightly. "Because I was scared. The board wanted me gone. My father's legacy was crumbling. I thought if I was harder, colder, stronger than everyone, I could prove I belonged. But all I proved was that I'd forgotten what my father actually valued." She paused, voice breaking. "He valued people like you. People who do the right thing without needing recognition. People who show up when it's hard. People who sacrifice everything because it's what needs doing." Silence stretched between them. Carter studying her face, seeing something he recognized, the exhaustion of carrying weight alone, of drowning while pretending to swim, of being terrified that the mask might slip and reveal that underneath you were just human and scared and trying your best. "My father told me something before he died." Carter's voice was quiet, carrying memory like weight. "He said, 'Son, you can lose everything, your job, your health, your money, but if you keep your integrity, you never truly fall. You just land somewhere different.'" He looked at Emma's drawing on the nightstand. a jet with perfect detail and hope in every line. He was right. When I lost flying lost, Lauren lost everything I thought defined me. Integrity was the only thing that kept me standing. It's what I wanted Emma to see, that your character matters more than your circumstances. Victoria wiped her eyes, mascara smearing, but not caring. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. The question isn't whether I forgive you. The question is whether you're going to earn it. How? By being different. Not just to me, but to everyone. The janitors, the engineers, the people who make your company run while nobody's watching. Victoria nodded, then pulled out an envelope from her pocket. I want to offer you a job, head of safety training. Teach our pilots and engineers what you know about survival, about systems, about what keeps people alive when everything goes wrong. Carter opened the envelope, saw a salary that was 3 times what he'd made as a janitor, benefits from Aetna that would cover Emma's therapy indefinitely, a position that mattered. I'm not for sale, Ms. Crane. Victoria's face fell. I'm not trying to buy. I never was for sale. That's why I refused your father's offers after Nevada. That's why I mopped floors instead of cashing in on my record. I want to earn my place. I want my daughter to see that integrity matters more than money. He looked at the contract again. But I'll take the job. On 3 conditions. Name them. First, I want to build a program for kids from families like mine, kids from Arlington and Grand Prairie who can't afford flight school. Teach them about aviation, about what's possible when you refuse to give up. Victoria nodded immediately. Done. Second, Walter Jenkins is involved. 35 years at Apex, and he deserves recognition. Also done. Third, Carter met her eyes, searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. You come to the first class, not as CEO, just to listen, to see these kids the way I see them, as people with potential, not problems to solve. Victoria's voice came out thick with emotion. Then I'll be there. I'll try to be worth your trust. That's all anyone can do. Try. She stood to leave, paused at the door. Your father was right, Captain Brooks, about integrity, about landing somewhere different, about all of it. He usually was. That's what made losing him so hard. After she left, Carter lay back against the pillows staring at the ceiling, where water stains made patterns that didn't quite look like clouds, but were close enough if you had the right kind of imagination. 3 months of physical therapy. 6 to be safe. Then teaching instead of flying, passing knowledge to the next generation, instead of proving his own worth in cockpits he'd never see again. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the life he'd needed all along. The one where falling down wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a different chapter. The one where his daughter could see that you could lose everything and still choose to keep going. Still choose to matter. 6 months later, the Brooks Aviation Academy opened its doors under Texas sky so blue it looked artificial. The ribbons stretched across the entrance of the converted Apex facility near Alliance Airport, held by Emma Brooks and Tyler Jenkins, both of them grinning like they'd won something worth more than money. 50 children from Fort Worth, Arlington, Grand Prairie, and Denton filled the hangar, ages 8 to 17, every color and background the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex could produce, all of them united by one thing: nobody had told them they could fly, so they'd stopped believing it was possible. Until today. Carter stood beside them wearing Wranglers and a button-down with an Iron Eagle pin on the pocket. He walked with a slight limp that would probably never fully disappear, a permanent reminder that some rescues left marks. But he walked. And that was enough. Walter Jenkins stood with his son Tyler's father, who'd finally accepted that petroleum engineering at UT wasn't the only path worth taking. Both of them beaming with pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with watching a boy's dreams become possible. Victoria approached the podium looking nothing like the CEO who'd thrown a mop. She'd kept her position at Apex, but had changed how she used it: less armor, more humanity, More listening, less proving. The board had noticed. So had the employees. So had the Pentagon, which had renewed the contract after the X-9 Raptor had been redesigned with safety protocols Carter had personally reviewed. Her voice carried across the hangar with Boston accent softened by 6 months of learning that strength came from lifting people up. 1 year ago, I stood in a facility watching it burn. I watched a man I'd dismissed as worthless run through fire to save his daughter. And I realized everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong. She paused, looking at the children who represented everything this moment meant. This academy exists because Carter Brooks believed that kids from Arlington who can't afford flight school still deserve to touch the sky, because he understood that heroes aren't made by medals or recognition. They're made by showing up every single day and choosing to make a difference. She stepped back, gestured to Carter, who moved to the podium with the careful walk of someone who'd learned to manage pain and keep moving anyway. He looked at the faces watching him, saw his daughter in the front row, saw Tyler beside her, the two of them having become friends the way children do when their worlds intersect at the right moment. Saw Walter and Jax and Betty Morrison and 50 children who were about to learn that where you started didn't determine where you could go. Carter didn't give a speech. He pulled up his sleeve, showed the tattoo that had been all over the news for 6 months, but these kids needed to see in person. Iron Eagle wings, Raptor Squadron. Most of the pilots who wore these didn't come home from Iraq and Afghanistan. The children leaned forward, sensing something true was about to be said. I used to fly F-22 Raptors out of Nellis Air Force Base. I saved lives. I did things I still can't talk about. Then I fell. My jet got hit, my back got hurt, and I couldn't fly anymore. He paused, letting them see the truth without pretending it was easy. For a long time, I thought my story was over. I went from commanding the sky to mopping floors, from being a captain to being invisible. And you know what I learned. He looked at Emma, then at all of them. My father, who grew up in Abilene working ranches, told me something before he died. He said, "Son, you can lose everything, your job, your health, your money, but if you keep your integrity, you never truly fall. You just land somewhere different." His voice strengthened, carrying the certainty of someone who'd tested the principle and found it true. I landed here, mopping floors, raising my daughter, learning that your worth isn't your job or your uniform or whether people notice you. Your worth is who you are when nobody's watching. Tyler raised his hand. Carter nodded. "Mr. Brooks, what if we're scared? What if we're not good enough?" Carter smiled, the kind that suggested he understood the question better than Tyler knew. "Then you're exactly like every pilot who ever lived. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you're terrified." He rolled down his sleeve, covering the wings. "Today, you're the new Iron Eagles. You might not fly F-22s out of Holloman yet, but you carry those wings inside you, and once they're there, nobody can take them away. Not failure, not fear, not people who tell you that kids from where you're from don't get to touch the sky." He paused, looking at each child in turn. "Because the sky doesn't care where you're from. It only cares if you're brave enough to try." The applause started small, then built until the hangar echoed with it. The children rushed forward to see the simulators, the workshop spaces, the classrooms where they'd learn about aerodynamics and courage and the difference between falling and landing somewhere different. Carter walked to the edge of the runway alone, watching an F-16 take off from Naval Air Station Fort Worth in the distance. The jet climbed into Texas sky with power that still made his chest ache with loss for what he'd given up. Victoria appeared beside him, her presence no longer feeling like a threat. "Do you miss it? Every day?" He watched the jet disappear into clouds that looked almost like mountains if you used your imagination. "But I found something better. teaching others to fly, watching them discover what's possible when someone believes in them. Victoria nodded. My father would have loved this, would have loved knowing that the pilot he searched for ended up here doing this. He did know, in the way that matters. He knew that the best people do the right thing without needing recognition. He lived that principle. Now I'm trying to teach it. Emma ran up with Tyler, both of them breathless with excitement. Daddy. They're serving BBQ from Cousins with the little airplane decorations, Tyler added. Mr. Brooks, can you show us the F-22 simulator, the one with the actual controls? Carter laughed. After BBQ, always fuel first, flight second. The kids ran back toward the hangar. Emma paused, looked back at her father and Victoria standing together. You two look at each other weird. Victoria and Carter both froze. Emma continued with the brutal honesty only children possessed. Tyler says if grown-ups like each other, they should just say so instead of making it complicated. She ran off before either adult could respond. Carter and Victoria stood in awkward silence until he found his voice. Out of the mouths of babes, she's perceptive. Gets that from her mother. The mention of Lauren hung between them, not uncomfortable but present. The photograph of Lauren that still sat on Carter's nightstand beside it, now a photograph of General Robert Crane in his dress uniform. Two people who'd died too young, but whose influence shaped everything that came after. Victoria's voice was soft. I'm not trying to replace her memory. I know. And I'm not trying to fill the space your father left. Some spaces don't get filled. They just become part of who we are. Inside the hangar, 50 children ate BBQ and dreamed about flying. Walter demonstrated simulators. Jax told stories about missions he was finally allowed to discuss. Betty Morrison served sweet tea and treated everyone like family. Emma and Tyler compared drawings at a table, both showing jets with Iron Eagle wings rendered in perfect detail, imagination and precision combined into art that suggested futures their parents were helping build. The sun set over Fort Worth, painting the sky orange and red and gold, the colors of fire transformed into beauty if you survived long enough to see it from the other side. Carter and Victoria walked back toward the hangar together, not quite touching, but not quite separate either. Two people who'd fallen in different ways landed somewhere unexpected and were learning that getting back up sometimes meant building something entirely new. On the wall inside, painted in letters large enough for everyone to see, Brooks Aviation Academy, Est. 2024. Below it, the motto in smaller text, real strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. And below that, in script that matched the tattoo Carter carried in memory of General Robert Crane and Lauren Brooks, who taught us that courage lives in small moments and love never truly ends. Carter paused at the wall, touching Lauren's name with fingers that still remembered holding her hand while she apologized for dying. Emma appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. Mom would have loved this. Yeah, darling, she would have. Do you think she can see it? Wherever she is, Carter looked at his daughter. This person who carried her mother's talent and his stubbornness and something entirely her own that suggested the future would be better than the past if people like her had anything to say about it. I think she sees you, and that's all she ever wanted to see. The Academy's first day ended with promises of tomorrow, with children who'd learned that the sky was possible, with a janitor who'd become a teacher and a CEO who'd learned that her father's greatest legacy wasn't the company, but the principles he'd lived by. 6 months had passed since the fire, since the revelation, since everything Carter had built around anonymity had burned away to reveal something more true underneath. He'd lost flying, lost anonymity, lost the quiet life he'd tried to construct from the wreckage of his military career, but he'd gained purpose. had gained 50 children who would learn that falling down wasn't the end of the story, had gained the knowledge that his daughter would grow up seeing that integrity mattered more than position. That strength came from lifting others, that love persisted even when the person you loved was gone. The Brooks Aviation Academy would graduate its first class in 2 years. 47 would go on to become pilots serving at bases across America. 12 would become aerospace engineers at Lockheed Martin and Boeing. 3 would train as astronauts at NASA Johnson Space Center. But that was the future. And futures were built one day at a time by people who decided that where they'd fallen wasn't where they had to stay. For now, there was just this moment, this hangar, this Texas sky that was big enough for dreams and second chances, and the understanding that sometimes you had to lose everything to discover what actually mattered. Carter Brooks, formerly Captain Brooks, formerly Reaper, currently dad and teacher, and proof that falling down was just another way of landing somewhere you needed to be. He looked up at the sky one last time before going inside. The stars were starting to appear, Orion's belt visible just above the horizon. 3 stars in a perfect line, the constellation that had guided him home through a sandstorm 9 years ago, when staying meant dying, and dying meant failing the people who needed him. The sky never forgot its pilots, but pilots had to learn that flying wasn't the only way to touch the sky. Sometimes teaching others to fly was the truest form of flight. Sometimes the story didn't end, it just changed altitude. And sometimes that was enough.